The head of an embattled public TV station here in central Illinois is digging out of a financial mess.
What hasn't been removed is the broken trust that we've had with some of our members and viewers.
That story coming up on WGLT's Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. Also on today's show, a visiting scholar at Illinois Wesleyan shares how mining for high-demand minerals can destroy communities.
There are many communities who question that after the extraction they will be able to survive in their lands.
And the Normal Theater kicks off a new film series on blaxploitation.
This is a touchstone for a moment of time.
Those stories follow a Bloomington Normal News update just ahead. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington Normal Audiology. Hear My Story continues with local patient Paul Brandt.
So I just went without them for all those years. I talked to somebody who had recently gotten hearing aids and talked about the fact that they were connected to the TV. And so that kind of prompted me to try it again.
Paul's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University in Normal, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good Tuesday, I'm John Norton. It's only been a week since John Wieland took over as board chair of WTVP. That's the Peoria-based public television station that's been embroiled in controversy. Allegations of financial mismanagement surfaced in October, soon after the resignation and death by suicide of the station's former president and CEO, Leslie Matuzak. Well, the station's board of directors approved major budget cuts, 9 employees were laid off, and the station suspended publication of Peoria Magazine. Last week, 11 board members resigned. John Wieland has started a new era with a note of contrition, apologizing for the problems that have broken the public's trust. Wieland tells Tim Shelley from our sister station, WCBU, the troubled public television station is already laying the groundwork for a comeback.
The financial challenges that WTVP had is actually been removed. What hasn't been removed is the broken trust that we've had with some of our members and viewers. And one of the primary things that the new board is doing is we are going down the path of restoring that trust. And then we're not asking anybody to do more than they've done. We're just asking them to come back to the fold and give it a level that the station has enjoyed for many, many years, and we're good to go.
Right. I mean, restoring trust, part of that's just going to be time, of course, but, I mean, what are some of the other things you're doing to, I guess, help give viewers confidence again?
Okay, so on Monday, there will be a email from my chair that will tell the 7,000 people who get those emails, this is John. These are the 3 things that the board is working on right now. And the 3 are working on restoring the trust, the right hand of fellowship with CPB, and then finding a new CEO. We are also, in about 2 or 3 weeks, we will be sending out a survey to all 7,000. It'll be kind of a survey monkey. We'll have to collaborate how many questions. It'll probably be around 10. We want to be short enough, but we want to hear what programs do you like, what do you dislike, and so we are going to work very hard to communicate when we get the right hand fellowship with CBEP. Everybody's going to know about it. I think when we get a CEO, I think that's going to be like the home run, because in 6 months, somebody's going to say, who's the chairman of WTVP? And the answer is going to be, I don't know. I mean, I'm not the face of WTVP. The CEO will be, and then the board will be back in the background where they should be.
And talking about CPB, I think you've said on a couple different times now you're planning to go to Washington next month to talk to them, correct?
Correct. They have a week-long event in D.C., and so I'll go there. But I'm also working to having conversations prior to that. A lady named Helen Barrick has done a great job putting all everything together so we can actually show them what happened. The thing with the CPB that happened, and this is like, you really can't judge people for how it happened, but let's say, I'm just making this stuff up, but let's say Caterpillar gives $10,000 on a donation. But then they say, we would like 3 advertisements in the magazine. So technically, part of that $10,000 should have been moved over to advertising income. Now, from Caterpillar's standpoint, they could care less. It's either a donation or it's an advertising expense, and so, Cats could care less. Well, Corporation of Public Broadcasting does care because how they determine how much to give the station is based on donations. And so by not moving those advertising dollars to advertising income, it artificially inflated the donations. It's not a huge deal, but it's still a deal because Corporation of Public Broadcasting, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the government and to the citizens of America to make sure that they are handling their money well. And I'm pretty confident that, they're going to see, wow, they've done a detailed research.
That was WTVP's new board chair, John Whelan, speaking with Tim Shelley from sister station WCBU. This is Sound Ideas, WGLT's news magazine. I'm John Norton. There's a good chance you used something that required lithium today. If you used a smartphone or a smartwatch or plugged in your hybrid or electric vehicle or even used a motorized toothbrush, lithium played a part in your life today. A scholar coming to Illinois Wesleyan University next month hopes her visit to Bloomington Normal will inform people about the destruction that follows mineral mining, much of which occurs in South and Latin America. Barbara Galindo tells WGLT's Lindsay Jones about her research into how these communities resist large mining operations that often leave their land polluted and people sickened.
It was in the Amazon that I got interested in extractivism because the communities there, the Quechua, they were trying to defend their lands against oil extraction, and they were successful. So I was very overwhelmed with deforestation, the destruction of oil companies in the Amazon, and I wanted to learn how did that started. So I decided when I started my PhD, I decided to work on mining, to study mining as a cultural and historical matrix of extractivism in Latin America.
You mentioned a couple of times earlier that it was a hot topic for a number of reasons. Is there anything in particular that makes it such a hot topic right now?
Yeah, it is a hot topic because of the energy transition, the extraction of lithium. So we have the lithium triangle in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, where we have communities that resist against lithium extraction. And we have also an expansion of this lithium operations in Brazil, for instance, in the state of Minas Gerais, in the Valley do Jequitinhonha, and I believe so in Mexico too. So we will see an expansion of lithium mining operations on the continent. So I think mining is very relevant to think about climate change,
I think something that has been growing in popularity for some time, this is not that new, is the use of electric vehicles in the U.S. and I guess in other places as well. But it's on my mind here because we have an electric vehicle plant in town. But I also know that as there's a demand for more electric vehicles, there's also a demand for minerals, right? And so I wonder, is there any concerns or correlations between an increased demand for these resources and more extractive production in Latin America?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm more familiar with lithium, the extraction of lithium in the Andes, in the salt flats of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, for instance. They are known as the triangle of lithium, or the lithium triangle. So the communities, the indigenous communities that live in these places, they're not happy with this. in general, especially when you have like in Argentina, in northwest Argentina, in Jujuy and Salta, where you have like 33 communities who are together to like say no to the lithium extraction because of the water. When you think about also the salt, their salt flats, they have like a different relationship with the salt flats. They extract salt to live, and this for like centuries. They say that the salt flats are their family, are their mother, for instance. So they have like a very different relationship with this nature. It's not only the water per se, the conditions of survival for these communities, but also the spiritual relationship that they have with their land.
There's no room for that kind of nuance, that kind of relationship when it comes to economic production and demand in general.
Yeah, exactly. So this the lithium mining in Latin America is a hot topic right now because there are like many communities who like question that after the extraction they will be able to survive in their lands.
So what are some of the consequences that you observed of these big extractive projects going forward and being a part of the landscape of these areas?
I think the pollution side of it is the worst because it has like long effects and it like kills slowly people, animals, of course. It goes through the waters and the land, so it's kind of I think it's the main problem. Besides the big destruction that we see. An open pit mine, for instance, is something very ugly to see, right? It's a big hole in the land. But besides that, the pollution, for sure.
What happens in these communities? Are they just left to deal with it on their own? Does the government do anything?
In general, they have to deal with that on their own because the state acts together with the big companies in general.
How do they do that, without...
Yeah, activism, like mostly women going to Lima, marching to Lima on foot, They call sacrifice marches on foot. So the mothers of contaminated children, for instance, they leave like different cities from the from the central Peruvian Andes and go to Lima to call the attention to protest in the streets of Lima. So yeah, they try to counter these things to get environmental justice through activism.
That's scholar Barbara Galindo speaking with WGLT's Lindsay Jones. Galindo says a majority of the activists pushing back against the mineral extraction are women because she says they don't negotiate the health and safety of their families. Galindo will be a scholar in residence at Illinois Wesleyan University from February 7th through the 10th. Thanks for listening to Sound Ideas today. This is WGLT's News Magazine. I'm John Norton. On the heels of last semester's course on horror films, scholars Stanford Carpenter and Eric Wisselman are back with a new honors seminar and set of public screenings at the Normal Theater. The series features 4 blaxploitation films and a documentary about the era, and it kicks off this week with Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. The seminal 1971 independent film kicked off nearly a decade of prolific filmmaking for black actors, directors, and producers. But as Carpenter tells WGLT's Lauren Warnicki, naming a course on blaxploitation films turned out to be tricky.
Looking at it through today's sensibility, my first thought was, wow, if somebody maybe didn't know what blaxploitation films were, if this was a new term to them, how would they respond to it? And my first thought was, it didn't sound good, to somebody who'd never heard it before. Whereas if you've heard it before, it's like, oh, this is cool. This is a touchstone for a moment of time, But if you're coming to it not being familiar with the world, which is the case with most students, I could see where a lot of questions would come up. And Eric and I actually had a lot of conversations about that. One of the things that I arrived at very quickly was we couldn't have blaxploitation at the front of the title. In fact, we took, the phrase, "Can you dig it?" which is something we wanted to incorporate into into the title, and initially we were talking about having it at the end. We actually moved it to the front, and then used the title to kind of explain where we were going with the term before we got to the term. So that's why you get the title. Can you dig it? Exploring race and representation in blaxploitation films.
Can you dig it? Who's the cat that walk about when there's danger all about? Right on. They say this cat Shaft is a bad mother. I'm talking about Shaft.
In my lifetime, I've experienced my identity being referred to as Negro, Black, Afro-American, African-American, right? So, in some ways, it's kind of fitting that you would have trouble with the term for the 70s, because back then, even how we referred to African-American identity was different, right? And some of the terms for African-American identity have not weathered well. I kind of think it's par for the course, and it's part of the work that we have to do when we're introducing these things to new people.
Eric, can you talk about the capacity for students in their 20s to take on that historical context and really wrestle with it?
I found that most students, even if they are a little shocked, as long as they're given some sort of heads up, they appreciate the opportunity to wrestle with these things. That's part of why people are in college. Most people's reaction to this term, and this is true even among scholars and critics who were writing at the time, very much responded to that word exploitation, because it's a tricky word, right? We come to it as lay folks, and we think about, okay, people are being exploited. That's bad. But when you look at the history of cinema, that term itself is also tricky, because there were quote unquote exploitation films, which blaxploitation was one type. But also the term exploitation is kind of an action in film. There's a long history of this term exploitation, which really just means, how do you get attention from an audience? How do you identify a group of people that you want to, come to your film? And how do you bring them in? Then there's exploitation films, which say it's all about sensation and not really about message.
I have some apprehension about these films in the way that women specifically are treated and represented. And so Pam Grier notwithstanding. So
but she's 25% of the of the film series.
It's true.
My name's Coffee.
Coffee, black and stacked and packed with fury, with both barrels zeroed in on the mob's top killers.
This is the end of your rotten life, you dope pusher.
And I'd say probably about the mid-aughts, you actually had a lot of women of color who were film scholars who were revisiting these films and, sort of acknowledging this ambivalent tension. Because yes, there are problematic elements, and there was also a lot of strength. As a matter of fact, one book I was just reading yesterday, the scholar, she was arguing that the blaxploitation heroines, Pam Grier, Tamara Dobson, they sort of set the model for the modern action heroine. Like, they basically argued, if you didn't have Coffee and you didn't have Cleopatra Jones, you wouldn't have had Ripley in Alien.
Literally my first impression when I was young of blaxploitation films, the women in blaxploitation films, and an impression that has endured over time for me, regardless of of whether I felt positively or negatively about the overall portrayal, is that women were portrayed as having agency over their, for the most part, they had agency over their body. They also had agency as it related to violence. And I think that's something that's very important to talk about. Whenever we start getting into heroic narratives, what's really important are what characters are actually able to have agency over violence. They are the ones who pick up the gun. They are the ones who decide who gets shot. They are the ones who stand and fight and protect. They're the ones who, many of these are revenge fantasies. They're the ones seeking revenge because that's like the primary way in which, one of the primary ways in which agency is expressed within these genres. And leaving blaxploitation films a little bit, I think of one Marvel character that is entirely based on Pam Grier would be Misty Knight. If you look at what happens when you take a Black female character and give her agency, give her power, give her control, like she actually stands out within the Marvel universe, which to some degree also makes her a critique of women in the MCU. The irony is, to some degree, Pam Grier has been typecast as a Black woman with agency.
One of the criticisms, maybe in hindsight, of the blaxploitation era is that it presented Black people as criminals, as vigilante justice seekers, as, drug addicted, as over-sexualized, and that white people's voyeurship of that was allowing them to dig in their heels with stereotypes that they were perceiving.
Well, I think there's the inverse to that is something else that was present for a Black audience, right? They were seeing somebody who wasn't passively accepting violence from the police. So yeah, one of the beautiful things about stories is that you can come to the story and you can bring your position and you can see different things in it. And that's also one of the downsides of the story if you're trying to control a message, right? I look at Sweetback's Badass Song and we see a Black man who's on the run. He's on the run from police, but the police are functioning in the same way as the bounty hunters did during slavery. What you could argue, oh my gosh, yes, he's fighting the police. He's killed a police officer, or he's done this, he's done that. But ultimately, if you're keying into that character, you're also realizing that this is his literal journey to freedom.
Can you take it, baby?
Can You Dig It? Exploring race, representation, and culture in blaxploitation films begins with Sweetback's Badass Song. It screens Thursday at the Normal Theater and continuing weekly through February 22nd. Author and filmmaker David Walker will attend the final event of the series. That's a screening of his documentary film, Macked, Hammered, Slaughtered, and Shafted. WGLT's Lauren Warnicki spoke with co-professors Eric Wesselman and Stanford Carpenter. And that's Sound Ideas today, WGLT's news magazine, made possible in part by Bloomington Normal Audiology. I'm John Norton. Story help today came from WGLT's Lindsay Jones and Lauren Warnicki, and from sister station WCBU, Tim Shelley. Ryan Toohey edits the show. This is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.